Welcome to the Victorian Small Business Network podcast. IT and tech suppliers play a critical role in keeping businesses running. But when things go wrong, contracts and legal gaps can leave suppliers and their customers exposed. In this episode, we'll be diving into common contract challenges in the IT and tech supplier space, sharing practical tips from our real-life experience helping both IT customers and suppliers. I'm Sarah Burke, a commercial and business lawyer and owner of SLB Legal. I have over 10 years' experience drafting, reviewing and negotiating contracts for IT and tech suppliers and customers. Today, I'm joined by Suresh. Please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Suresh GP. I'm the Managing Director of Taub Solutions based in Australia, India, Singapore and US. It's a global consulting advisory firm. So I help deliver IT best practices and digital transformation solutions for customers worldwide. I'm absolutely honored to be a part of this particular episode because it's so important for a lot of IT managed service providers to think about contracts and the real clauses that put them into trouble later. So I can't wait to unravel this whole pack.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for joining me because obviously contracting is something that's close to my heart. So I feel like this conversation is going to be very useful to both IT and tech suppliers, but also the customers who are buying these products. I'd love to hear about any examples or cases where you've seen it go wrong. Perhaps there hasn't been a contract or an inappropriate contract.
Well, let's look at that. I want to look at three different personas, okay? The first persona is when I was a service provider. When I started Taub Solutions 10 years back, I just wanted to get a deal, right? All I cared was just a deal. So what was important was I got the proposal signed and they say, yes, we're good to go. And I'm so thrilled because I'm getting money, right? But as I go through this, I do a monthly invoice. I thought I got everything right in terms of getting paid in every 30 days. That was great. So I place my first invoice and they pay me 95% of the invoice amount. And I just go and say, is this like the tax deducted as source and stuff like that? No. We will pay you the 5% later when the whole project is done. I think it's fair enough because they are doing it for the first time. I said, that's great. And I do this one and 12 months gone. And then I complete my project and say, so that 5% which was left over, can you just accumulate me and give it to me? They said, sorry, we're not happy with your service and we cannot pay you. I had tears in my eyes because the first time I spent my heart and soul to do something and I was like, someone is taking me for a ride. And if I want to reach out to someone, I couldn't do because I had no paperwork and that hit me so hard. So for me, a lot of these stuff, people only understand when they go and burn their fingers. I look at this analogy, right? If you go to a child and say, do not touch the fire, it will burn you, they don't listen, right? They go there and touch the finger and it burns off and then they do. And I think most of the IT suppliers and managed service providers, I'm not saying that they have to burn their fingers, but they learn that in a very hard way. So flipping over to that same question, from a legal standpoint, from your perspective, what do you think is one mistake that IT managed service providers and tech suppliers make in their contracts, if at all there is a contract?
Well, I mean, the first mistake, of course, would be, I would say, is not having a contract. But a lot of the time, managed service providers and IT or tech product suppliers, they do have a contract. But the issue is it's a cobbled together contract or an online template or something that they've got a little bit from A and a little bit from B and they've put it all together in a mishmash situation and then they've got a contract. The issue here is a lot of the time they don't actually understand what they've put in their own contract. So one issue is that the description of the products and the services will be quite general or generic or even throw off to some sort of other document that they don't actually prepare. And therefore, the customer and even the supplier themselves are not clear on what they are getting and when they are getting it. What's included, what is excluded. So similar to your situation, when you go to put your invoice in, there's an argument about what you should have got. So the customer believes they were getting ABC, the supplier thought it was DEF. And then there's an argument about getting paid, and at the end of the day, often the supplier will end up out of pocket because they don't want to ruin the relationship, they don't want to ruin their reputation, but they've got a bad taste in their mouth because they've walked away and they haven't, they believed what they scoped was clear and they should be paid for that. Having a clear set of rules from the start would resolve some of those issues early because you'd have the paper, you'd have the description in the contract to pull out when everyone is arguing. The other issue I see, and this has happened actually in the last 2 or 3 contracts I've reviewed. A lot of the time what happens is a supplier will come to me and say, can you review this contract? I've been using it for years, but I've just not had a lawyer go through it with me.
Right.
Great. So they're actually shocked at the amount of questions I will ask them because they didn't even realise that this information was in their contract. And what I find is they've actually got terms and conditions because they've borrowed them from different places.
Correct.
They're actually really swayed in the customer's favour. Sometimes they should be. It's not to say the customers don't have rights and things that they should protect. But in this case, they've gone so far unfavourable to themselves that basically they're accepting all the risk, all the liability, all the responsibility, and the customer's accepting nothing. Now, if you're creating your own contract, why would you put yourself in that position as your best foot forward?
Sure.
And they're shocked. They didn't even realise that's what the terms and conditions said.
Right.
So it's definitely worthwhile if you're using these type of contracts, taking the time now, especially if your business is scaling, you're taking on bigger jobs, you're taking on more risk, to get a lawyer to look through what you've got and update that to make it fit your business.
Well, let's talk about that in a split part. One of the biggest problems, Sarah, today is that it's all in digital. And you go that next, and sign it out, whether it's a DocuSign or any other signs to do that. So the part of the problem is the fine print of what is written in between the lines is just not evident. I'll give you one more reasons why there was a problem and now I play the role of a business coach and I look at service providers making growth. And I ask this question, what happens if there is a dispute as a supplier? Who are you going to reach out from a customer organization perspective? Typically, I would expect a vendor/supplier dispute arbitrator who doesn't have vested interest with the company being called out. Do you think that there is a forum like that exists with every customer organization where if there is a dispute that they want to get a fair trial for me to voice that out? Is that even a clause?
One of the things that you need to have in your contracts in that regard is a dispute resolution clause and condition. So that's where you'll decide what process the parties will follow first before they maybe go to court proceedings. And it's agreement between you that perhaps you will, sometimes it's an internal escalation. We'll go to our executive, we'll go to our CEO. If we can't, first we'll try and resolve it ourselves. If not, it's going to get escalated in our organisation and we're going to meet and we're going to try and resolve it. If we can't do that, then you may go to something like mediation, or you may contract in there that you'll go to arbitration and that will finally determine the dispute.
Right.
So it is important to have those processes in your contract if that's what you would like to do and follow, instead of going straight to court. Otherwise, either party can go straight to court if that's what they like.
Yeah, and in the other problem that I see with small, medium-sized business is they don't have the opportunity to frame a contract. Because most of the times when you do work with customers, the customers define how the contract is. You either can say yes or no, because there is no option for suppliers to go back and say, hey, this seems to be a clause that I'm not very comfortable with. So do you think sometimes we are at a disadvantage because we really need to get that contract, but we don't know how to dispute? And it's a kind of a chicken.
I do understand that. And what you say is very common, where a supplier will say to me, well, I've got no ability to negotiate. I heard you say earlier, I was so excited to get the deal done. I just signed it. That is very common. But I can tell you now, taking a moment to ask a lawyer to read through that contract, even if it truly is non-negotiable, and I'm telling you now, I have negotiated the non-negotiable contracts.
Nice.
If you've got a good product, if you've got a good service, if you've got a good solution that you are supplying, the customer will be willing to negotiate with you. It shouldn't be always coming down to the contract. So you've still got to do that sales piece
Correct.
to get you there, and you should know what the risks are in a contract, because the value of that deal might be too low for the high risk you are taking on.
Right.
Part of your price point is based on what you are expecting to deliver and what you're expecting to control as part of risk. Now, if you're then going to have to take on more than that in your contract, which you weren't aware of, the price needs to go up.
Right.
And that is a strong negotiating tool for both parties. I dare say sometimes the customers aren't too clear on what their contract says, because sometimes they will have generic terms that don't actually fit the type of supply that's going to be under that contract. So customers actually can be quite open when you do point out things like, I see you've got this process for payment in here. You want us to use this app, perhaps. You want us to do it in this way. Now, is it okay if we do it this way? Because we find that actually is more efficient to the type of service we're delivering to you, and the type of supply you're getting doesn't actually match what's the payment process that's in your contract or the delivery process that you've put in your project. You're going to create all this extra admin. I'll be charging you more for that.
Right.
So it does pay to look through it.
Correct. And
let them know, I'm just going to have a look through it. I will get a lawyer to look through it. I'm not looking to stall the deal. I'll do it, as fast as I can, but I do need to check that. And then if it's really not non-negotiable, then you're going in with your eyes wide open. You know what the things are that you need to comply with. You can build your service delivery around it. You can put processes in place to reduce your risk, because if you're taking on a high risk, perhaps you can minimise that with certain processes or procedures within your own organisation. Right. But signing it and having no idea is not the way to go.
That's a fair point. And sometimes people lure you as in the spirit of doing it because it's not in the contract. But I know Sarah, so that's why we will honor it. I find this statement very confusing, because at one end you want to have a good relationship with your customer and you want to kind of move in that journey, but you want to get your interests protected. So it's a kind of a delicate situation of how service providers should put the foot down and say, well, we have a great relationship, that's great, but I think the contract doesn't tell about that. So our people need to be educated in that part, and that's where we come as a kind of authority to say there are do's and don'ts. If you don't pay attention, then it will cost you a lot. So have you seen such kind of scenarios?
Well, you do need to know what your non-negotiables are.
Right.
You need to know what your hard line is. Obviously, you don't need to complain or fight every little battle, because you're trying to create a relationship. And I get that. I mean, I own a business myself.
Sure.
It's not, black and white all the time when it comes to a contract or a negotiation or a relationship or a dispute. Sometimes both parties need to give something up to get to the common goal. But you need to know well in advance before that deal what, you want to get paid for, when you want to get paid, what items you're willing to take responsibility for, and what you really need the customer to do so that you can actually do your delivery. Like, for example, sometimes in a managed services or even an IT solution space, we actually need quite a few inputs from the customer during onboarding. Now, if they don't actually give you those inputs and you can't start supplying the services, then you can't start charging, but you're actually doing all this work beforehand.
Correct.
So you do need to sort of set the scene
Correct.
on those items, but then there might be smaller things that the customer really wants and you're happy to provide.
I think all said and done, people learn through only experience. Because a lot of times this is all great to hear, but on a reality, all that I strike about is, have I got the deal done? Have I invoiced it? Okay, if it doesn't come, it is. And some business owners are very busy working on other projects. They don't have time to chase up for the invoices.
That's correct. But I would say to that, as a business owner myself, don't try to do everything yourself.
Correct.
I know it's hard when you're starting. You have to do everything yourself. Perhaps you don't have the resources, but there are outsource options. For example, now we're talking about, do you think I do my own IT?
No.
Goodness me, no. If something goes wrong with my computer, am I the expert? No. Am I going to spend hours and hours fixing something that someone else can do in 5 minutes? No. That's just not a useful, it does not use my time wisely. I'm better off doing the lawyering.
Correct.
So it's no different. A business owner shouldn't be doing the lawyering. They probably shouldn't be doing the debt collection, or they should be trying to automate some certain things. So perhaps it is about getting that really good initial contract created for your standard position terms and maybe a guidance note, and you invest in that, and then you can use that moving forward to streamline your sales process, for example.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I've become a business coach was, I learned a lot of the hard lessons around in 10 years that a lot of these small business owners think that they want to do everything. They're spread too thin and they want to, like what you said, they want to do everything. And I said, you need to focus on your strength and then leave the rest to the experts. Because when you bring the expert, it frees up your time, but you don't need to think too much about it. And it's a psychological issue. A lot of times people think that, if I go and ask for help, I might be considered incompetent. So there's a little of cultural issue that needs to be educated.
Yeah, and I do think it comes from a place when you're first starting out, you do need to do a lot yourself, but then you forget that as you're growing and changing, everything's getting bigger, and that's the time to get some people in to help and get those sort of outsourced assistance.
Sure.
So we all have different departments, but when we're a small business, you probably just need to have an outsourced department. You're not a big corporate, for example, that has HR and marketing, but you should still outsource those things, and legal's no different to that.
Sure.
So from your perspective, I mean, as you said, you've been an IT supplier, but you've also provided coaching and consulting to suppliers in this space. Have you got any examples and how it was dealt with when perhaps the scope was not clearly defined, a bit vague, unclear, or perhaps there was a mistake in the pre-sale quoting, and perhaps there's some tips for how to deal with that more in a practical sense?
Absolutely. So in a typical IT landscape, there are two types of contracts: fixed price contracts and time and material contracts. We've been dealing this for years now. So the part of the problem starts when it comes to time and material contracts, because every time the customer says that I'm not getting value with the time that I spend, and that's always a conversation you can never dispute. So the first and foremost thing that I ask people is that, first of all, you be very cautious when you talk about time and material. Typically, the suppliers actually fill the timesheets, and then they say, this is what I filled in, right? Now, a part of the problem is when we do it, and I've done this myself, people just enter timesheets, but they don't give enough amount of details, and they don't keep their supervisors up to date about what they're doing. So a lot of times when it goes up and they look at the cost, they say, how did we even approve the cost? So somewhere I think the primary objective is also to make sure that your superiors are aware of the whole thing that you're doing, and there's no ambiguity, because the communication when you do a project is going to be phenomenally important. And sometimes people think that, it's part of the contract. We agreed on terms and conditions. This is a monthly invoicing. I have X number of people. I do it. No, it doesn't work. Because at the time that they want to kind of stop your project, what appeals to them is the total cost of invoice. So a lot of people go into this problem saying that, I think it is already in the contract. It is obvious. It is not obvious. So sometimes you have to socialize and sensitize with your supervisor and the people, saying that we are providing this service. This is why it is costing, and part of it. It's a little uncomfortable for some of the people. They don't want to tell people. But once you improve your communications, it becomes a lot more easier to do it. So that's one scenario. The second scenario, in terms of a fixed price contract, the customer has a liberty to exploit this whole service provider, because anyway, you agreed on a price and then we have to do it. And that's part of the scope creep. So the first thing that I had this instances with one of the IT supplier came to me and said, Suresh, we have this problem. We agreed on a fixed price. There's a terms and conditions. There is a SOW. They call it statement of work. This is what we agreed. We want to move ahead. And suddenly they stopped us and said that we need to do more. And we didn't agree on this one. So how do you do that? So I always use this symbol like this, time out, guys. Yeah. We need to talk about it, because this is not ending anywhere. And sometimes they don't have that conversation first time that they hear, and it becomes a disaster. Sometimes it's an uncomfortable conversation, but if it's an uncomfortable, let's talk over, because this is where most of the IT suppliers go wrong. They think that it will eventually fade out. It will never eventually fade out. I mean, you have to address the elephant in the room. And that's where a lot of people just get panicked. So we said, this is what we agreed. But this cannot be possible because going back to the triple constraints of cost, schedule, and looking at quality of the product or service, I need more time. And I have seen every time you put forward your view to be more proactive, you would have actually handled this. So these are a couple of things that come straight out of my mind, that both with time and material and fixed price, you have to be very careful of where you play around. And I always believe in Murphy's Law. Okay. One of the best person, right, who actually says that whatever you think wrong or what go wrong will definitely go wrong. Okay. So you're better prepared from a risk aversion that it's not going to be easy, but you have to just watch out. So I know that was a loaded one, but hopefully people start thinking about what else could go wrong. Because you apply with that mindset, you will leave no stone unturned.
So can you maybe expand a little bit on which sort of projects you have seen work really well with time and materials and which work really well with fixed? Because there's often different suppliers take different models for similar things, okay. I find. I mean, I'm only drafting the contract, so I am being led by how they would like to charge. But from a practical sense, there may be some that are better lean towards one item and not the other, and then less disputes possibly.
Absolutely. But if you look at from this also has to have a bearing on how customers look at contracts. Now, customers are paranoid about time and material contracts because they are not able to do the budgeting for the next year. So they definitely prefer fixed contracts wherever possible. Mm-hmm. From a service provider standpoint, as long as the variables are very clear, I would go with fixed price contract. But there are certain variables that you do not know the start of the project. So we say this is what kind of roles and responsibility. And this is another part of the problem. You should get your rules and responsibilities actually ironed out, right? Your RACI metrics, for example. Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. And accountable is a very interesting part. Accountability means a single neck to choke. And this is where it becomes very tricky. All I care about is I have to do myself, but what will be the accountability of the customer if we don't approve the user acceptance design at a particular time? And that should not cost me. So somewhere the roles and responsibilities have to be clear. So to your point, whenever I know all my variables are clear, I'll go with fixed price contract. If I don't know, I will make that caveat because we don't know. For example, I give this example. We are doing a project where they want to get their entire team trained and certified into a new technology. We sign a contract. Mm-hmm. It's a 6-month program. And we go through this like a boot camp training and doing that. Oh, that's great. What they did not tell us is some of the skills that we expect people to move into that, which is not even discussed. When we go there and say that, oh, you know what, before I do this particular thing, I need some prerequisite to be fine. So they did not do it. But my 6 months contract is getting done. Mm-hmm. So now we say that, oh, we didn't complete what we planned because you did not have your prerequisites filled in. Mm. So then it becomes a very, very tough segment. So if you don't do your discovery well, you will get into problems, which means you really need to iron out in a whiteboarding what you are entitled to, what are the experience, what are the prerequisites. That expectation setting should be done very well. And then you decide whether it makes it mutually agreeable for a fixed price or time and material. Most of the times we don't do this whiteboarding at all. We think, it's a standard services, standard things, just get it done. And then they just bang their head on the wall. It's not working anymore.
And what I'm also seeing is a lot of the subscription type, especially around support, for example, where you can sort of build out a support plan or a support service, different tiers, and they pay a monthly fee.
Right.
How do we also help stop the scope creep there?
Which is a very valid question. I'll give you an example of what happened. So I had a license that I procured because it's like shadow IT, I didn't want to go to local IT. I'll buy as a service, software as a service, and then bought it. And then I cancel it and they say, no, this is valid for 12 months. Mm-hmm. And I said, gosh, I don't know. So only thing I could do was I wanted to change the credit card numbers so it didn't work. Otherwise, I would have been broke. So the point is, first and foremost, is to understand terms and conditions very clearly, particularly when it is a digital subscription. Most of the IT suppliers do not want to hire a legal attorney, and then they say, well, we know it's just plain English. That's the first part of the problem. So one of the things is about having people like you being available on a freelance basis, for example, because honestly, a lot of IT suppliers might not have that budget to have a full-time legal person. So they might need to know. In fact, before meeting you, I never knew that it was existing, right? So thanks to you, I mean, through some of our common forums, including VSBN, we know that it existed. So asking for help to read through it is important. But the second part of it, people are so much worried about time. The biggest detriment for such kind of issues is they don't pay attention to these details. Its time is getting to be the most possible suspects in that part. So sometimes I tell people that you should stop doing things in a hurry and you should have someone else look at this whole aspect. So, for example, I and my wife are co-founders of this company. I said some of these things I would not look at it. I'll give it to someone else who has the eye for detail. She has got eye for details, and she would do a lot more better job than I would see looking at a contract. So sometimes you need to say that I'm not competent. I might have someone else to do it. So if you can help them understand how much they would gain by delegating these responsibilities, it'll go a long way. But as I said, they really need a person like you to voice out. So flipping over that same question, if I have an IT service provider who probably is not very sure whether we need to go this way and that way, but can they reach out to you? How does that work in terms of how do you help them, considering that, first of all, they don't have a lot of money, but they also want quick thing to be done because they don't have a lot of time to complete the contract because it's already on the line. So how do you think that you can help small business owners or IT suppliers from getting this done, validated, and they can move quickly on this one?
Yeah, well, I offer to people that I can sort of act as like their outsourced in-house counsel. I spent many years as an in-house counsel for a large corporate, and the beautiful thing about that when you have an in-house legal department is you can pick up the phone.
Right.
What do you think, Sarah?
Correct.
What do you think about this? And it's a 15-minute conversation.
Correct.
Can you review this letter?
Right.
Just so I don't say anything wrong. But what happens in a small and medium business is they don't have that support.
Correct.
But I actually do find that a lot of the time they think that they can't ask a lawyer to help them with something small. They're expecting that they need to do a whole big project with a lawyer. And perhaps that's been their experience. Yeah. I don't know. Right. But that is not the case. Right. There's no job too big or too small. I'm a small business owner like yourself, and perhaps if someone rang you for something small, you would still do that.
Correct.
And by having those, having that sort of outsourced phone a friend lawyer, what is also great about it is I will get to know your business really well because of the questions you're asking me, the things I'm looking at, so that, over time, it'll get quicker and quicker, the advice that you need. Sometimes what happens is the very first thing they need is a contract review. Yes, that takes a long time, but because we've been through that process, and I'll tell you, I ask a lot of questions. Right. Like they get sick of me.
Correct.
But because of those questions, next time when you need to negotiate that same contract or you have a contract from the supplier, I will be able to know very quickly, do you remember what we talked about last time?
Correct.
You don't like that. You don't agree with those inclusions with your services because you told me that last time we talked.
Right.
So we're building this relationship so that you've got this phone a friend lawyer.
Right.
And you're not necessarily having to enter into a large retainer or do a really big project where we're negotiating a deal for a long time.
Right.
It's just a simple, we're going to come up with this new product. This is what we're going to put in our plan. We've drafted it up. Can you just have a look at it and review, and and then the legal person can come in and make it legal for you.
Makes sense.
And that can definitely be done.
Awesome. No, I think that's a great way to kind of do a little bit of doing that. Let's shift gears to a master service agreement. One of the problems with this master service agreement is it's got a term for 3 years, let's say. Okay, I have a pricing, but my pricing is increasing year over year. I just have to make sure that my inflation doesn't eat on my profitability. So what can a particular IT service provider do when the particular MSA is getting closed, or they don't even tell us it's kind of getting expired? So can we do something proactively to go there and say our prices are increasing? Can we have an addendum to make the change?
Well, there's a couple of things there. Firstly, from the get-go, you need to make sure your contract allows you to have price increases, and it is not unfair to necessarily have price increases provided the terms and conditions allow for it.
Right.
And that you have things like notification, ability for maybe the customer to back out if they're not happy with those price increases, or you have a clear calculation of how it's going to work each year,
Right.
something along those lines. That doesn't necessarily make that condition unfair or unenforceable, as long as there's clear guidance in your contract about how that price increase is going to start from the get-go. If you haven't had that, there is definitely a contract. While yes, we sign it, and from a customer's perspective, and also the suppliers, you're in there for the long haul. But that doesn't say there's not going to be points in time that perhaps you might not need to try and negotiate something called a variation or amendment. And you can definitely ask for that anytime. If both parties agree to it,
Correct.
you can do that.
Correct.
And part of that will be relationship and part of that will be legal.
Correct.
So it's about, like we've talked about already, having those hard conversations. This isn't working. This is the reason why. Can we make an amendment?
Correct.
Get that in principle agreement first, then go to the lawyers to draft it.
Correct.
Because if the two parties are already aligned, their instructions to their lawyers will be very clear.
Correct.
Minimise the back and forth, get it done, get the variation, and then we can all continue on the contract. If it's coming up to renewal, perhaps you might want to do a completely new contract, or you can do something called a renewal where you restate but make changes based on what's going on in the contract. And again, it's back to the negotiation table and finding out what works, what doesn't, doing that evaluation.
Correct.
Which is a great customer relationship tool anyway, because you're going to hear what they're perhaps unhappy about
Right.
at that time.
Awesome. I had this experience where in India, we have something called as MSME, which is microservice, medium, small companies kind of stuff. And they have to pay, if you are in the MSME cadre, they have to pay you within 45 days, max. And if they don't pay in 45 days, they are likely to incur interest. They have to pay interest. And I'm telling you, in my company, when we were part of being an MSME, we saw only one customer pay us interest for something that they overshot it by 45 days. Now, I have never known about that until someone paid off. So I have lost opportunities because there is a protection within the government that is done, but I did not do it. So in the similar manner, do we have within, let's say, Victoria state, that small business owners have certain rights that they can that they are entitled for when they go through some of these contracts?
Well, first of all, 45 days is a long payment time.
Right.
So I would not recommend that for a small business
Sure.
because it would be too long for
Correct.
your cash flow. But you set the payment. There's not a legislation saying you have to do it within this time. But you set the payment in terms in your contract. So it's just got to be fair and reasonable and based on like your legitimate business interest in that. So if it's 7 days, it's 7 days.
Right.
But you do often see in contracts that if they're late with paying after a certain amount of time, then you would charge interest, and sometimes that is a reference to the Penalty Interest Act, which is in the Victorian one, which is about 10%, and sometimes they'll say things like 2% more.
Right.
And it's accruing daily. And then you may charge that on the next invoice, maybe after you've notified them. And that's all drafted into your contract.
Sure.
And that's what I call is like a consequence for not paying.
Correct.
But what's even and I kind of hear what you're saying. It's like, well, we had all these rights for people to pay us interest, but no one did.
Yeah.
And I guess some people put that pay the other side. My suppliers will say to me, well, we have this interest in there, but we're not going to charge them. We're not going to chase them for interest if they pay us. Yes, but it is a consequence for non-payment, and I would still recommend you have it. What is also really great to have in your contract when it comes to payment is what I like to call encouragements.
Oh.
Suspend your services if they don't pay after a certain amount of time and you've notified them to pay. Get deposits. Payment at certain times, milestones, deliverables, and make it clear what those are so that there's no argument and you've ticked it off, you get paid.
Correct.
And that's encouragement, and it's also showing red flags when people can't pay.
Right.
And it's giving you ability to pull a lever to stop the additional non-payment down the line. if you're waiting 45 days, you may not know for a long time that they can't pay.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't look at the lever because they think that whatever the customer says is right. For example, I was talking to one of the businesses and said, why did you get advance of 50%? They said, can we even ask for 50% before? I said, yes, because you need to procure your products and give it. So we need to charge them 50%. And the remaining 50% can be done after the project is done. Now they've started to actually put that as part of a clause that if you want to do work, we need to have 50% upfront done. So it'll protect their cash flow better. But it's also sometimes they don't ask the questions, as you rightly said, they don't know what they're entitled to until they meet someone else.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask the hard question. I know it's hard when you're trying to get business, and I hear all the time comments like, that's just not how it's done in this industry. We've never done it that way. They won't agree to it. Okay, but have you asked? And perhaps it is a no, and then you deal with that at the time. But if you haven't asked, nothing's ever going to change, and you're never going to have any protections in your contracts. And if you're not setting the scene with the new customers that this is the way it's going to be, then you're just going to continue on this constant spiral of not being happy. Perhaps there's arguments over your services. There's definitely arguments over payment. And in a small business context, there's a lot of small businesses not getting paid or getting a long time before they get paid, and then they're struggling to pay their own staff, pay for their own materials. So sometimes just being honest about that with your customers. I need you to pay me so that I can do this job. That's okay. Yeah. And I think that's sort of been the theme, is have the difficult conversation, and what's the worst that can happen? I guess they can say no to that request, but hopefully they're still going to say yes to your business if you can do it the way they want as well.
Yeah.
What I find, because I've acted for both sides, so I get it, and you have to put on different hats, but so suppliers obviously are in the situation where they don't want to overpromise anything because obviously they're afraid of not being able to deliver, but the customers on the other side want a lot of promises because they don't want any failures. So what responsibility can the supplier or a cybersecurity supplier practically take on? Because what I find is there's sometimes practical overpromises that no party can actually achieve in the contracts.
Right. And I think it's a very important part of the conversation is that a lot of the wordings in the contract actually perplexes me because you don't write in a manner which people can understand in a very lucid way. So one of the things I tell people is that, can you make this more simplified rather than using acronyms and things like that? That's number one. The second part of the things is the risks. There has to be a specific call out only about risks. And that's a conversation that the customer and the service provider can agree. Because most of the times, if you don't agree on that, then it becomes a lot more disputed in the end. So for me, that's a very important call out in the initial phase when you are trying to get into this contract. The third one, when it comes to examples of where people try to exploit, is they have some ambiguity in certain places and they don't iron it out. They say, we will figure it out when we cross the ladder. That's where there is a big problem, because if you're not very clear today, you will never be clear few months or years down the lane. So sometimes any ambiguity is a question about stop. So I look at this terminology called the and-on card. There's something called as and-on card in manufacturing. If it's running there and suddenly you find something a problem, you pull the and-on card. It stops. The analogy about that is when you are writing a contract and you have something which is not really right, you stop. And then go back and zoom in and say, is that what it means? And then get that clarified. Because if you do a couple of these stuff, you can actually do it a lot better. But again, it all comes with experience, and a lot of horror stories that you gain over a period of time passes to wisdom. So something of that sort should be taken in consideration.
And also I would add to that is to remember from both sides, it is often a two-way street a lot of the time. So, for example, I have seen a contract recently and actually over time where the customer wants you to guarantee 100% cyber secure, for example. Well, in reality, that is a two-way street, and also it's not possible to say it will be 100% because it just, in today's world and for a long time, it's not practically possible. So we can't make a promise like that in the contract, yet the supplier is just so eager to get the deal done, they do. Well, at the minute there's some sort of breach, the supplier's on the hook, but it could have been the customer that caused that. But there's nothing in the contract to say it is a two-way street. You will be responsible for this, we will be responsible for that, and whoever's in error will be liable at that time.
Awesome. So let's go to the final piece of advice. Now, if you would like to give one final piece of advice for anybody who's in the IT service or product supplier to their customers, what would you recommend?
Don't try to do everything yourself, okay? As I said before, I don't do my own IT, so please don't try to do your own legal contracts. Yes, you'll have a great understanding of them. You know your commercial situation, but don't be afraid to ask for help and get the right help to partner with you so that you can get a customised deal and contract that you know what's in it, you know what you need to protect, and it actually says what you're going to deliver. Yeah. And how about for you? What's your final point?
For me, I think ask for help. You don't need to do everything by your own. But one important part for IT suppliers and tech product developers, you need to focus on risk management. You need to identify risk proactively. The only way that you can identify all this risk is when you are curious and inquisitive of what else could go wrong. Remember the Murphy's Law? You really need to have your antenna up and saying that what is the thing that is missing? What is the thing that is not very clear? Being curious, inquisitive is very important, and ask for help because you don't need to, as you rightly said, you don't need to figure out everything by yourself. But you ask for help and bring the right experts, you can save a lot of time, effort, and your mental peace. And that's so important than anything else. So don't think about saving a few bucks because the cost of that mistake is going to take you and wipe you out of all the fortune that you've made for months or years together.
I know, you do not want to be stressing or, not sleeping at night over what's in your contract or the dispute you're having with your customer. So get someone else to take the stress out so that you can just go on and grow your business.
Awesome. It's great talking to you, and I hope our viewers enjoyed the session.
Thank you. Thanks so much for joining. Both our details will be in the description underneath the podcast. If you need any help from either of us, please get in contact.